Hello and welcome to Baseball Bunch, the thing that we've done on occasion. I'm joined by Dan today. Dan's going to gloat about the Mets. I'm going to be annoying about the Yankees. And we're going to set some expectations on what we think is going to happen this year. This is my 10th straight year of being high on the Mets, and we'll see if it finally pays off. Dan, welcome.
This is my first year in several where I am high on the Mets. And thanks for having me on the show, Tom. Looking forward to another good set of Baseball Bunch, which we did, I think, just about a year ago when we did the 2021 predictions, where we all thought the Mets would be better. And they certainly were not. But we have a lot to look forward to. 2022 is decidedly different in pretty much every important way.
All right. Well, as John would say, I think this is going to be a good show. But for the Yankees, it was a bad offseason. And if you're wondering why I look so disheveled outside of just existing in this world and having a job, it's also, I thought about shaving this morning. And this is my rant. I thought about shaving this morning to be like, oh, Yankee, clean cut. And I was like, you know what? They stink. And they had this really awful offseason that pissed me off. And don't worry, we're going to get into more nuanced stuff, but I want to whine like a baby first. We didn't get the big fish in the pond. We didn't get any names. We didn't bolster the rotation at all. The team is basically being told, hey, good luck or something, by Brian Cashman and ownership. And until looking at some stats from last year and kind of evolving my opinion, I was like borderline, like this team might be 500, which for the Yankees is the equivalent of 60 wins, for the payroll that they have. But we're going to get more nuanced because I looked up some stats I will reveal to you in a second. And they kind of changed my perception on the team and gave me a little bit more hope than I thought I would have on this. But Dan, what are your initial thoughts on the Yankees offseason?
I mean, I think you put it very well in saying that where they needed to do multiple things, they really didn't do anything that materially changed the direction of the team and made the team like materially or like meaningfully better, right? I mean, like, I think if you look at, the big trade, the big transaction that's going to, define the offseason for them, that I guess has defined it, right, was the deal for Kiner Falefa and Donaldson. And like, I think it really says something that a lot of the fan base immediately looked at that and said, well, look at what the Twins did with what they got in that deal versus what the Yankees did, where they freed up $50 million in of an aging star in his mid-30s to go after Correa, which the Yankees could have just done if they had that cap space to begin with.
If they were willing to spend the money.
If they were willing to spend it. I mean, that's the thing, is that apparently they are, but just not on him, because they have to spend that money on Donaldson in the next 2 years. I mean, it's $25 million a year just about. So that's like the thing that's most aggravating, I think, if I was a Yankee fan. Not even like, you don't even have to be a Yankee fan to see that that's aggravating. Like, you just have to be a baseball fan to follow that and just be like, what? That almost made no sense. I mean, Donaldson had a pretty good year, I think, in 2021 from what I can recall, but we can look up his stats too in a minute, but like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like you're trading on net. You're getting an older player
who's more
expensive or about the same that you'd get for a bona fide star in his prime, and it just didn't seem like it made a ton of sense. Like, Kiner Falefa could be promising. I mean, he had a pretty good year on my fantasy team, which obviously makes me an expert on Kiner Falefa. But outside of that, I mean, I just don't see it. I mean, Correa is obviously an upgrade over Kiner Falefa. And, I think what you do there is you work with Gio, you work with Glaber, perhaps. And Glaber, third base is really not his position, but perhaps you work with Gio there, where, he's a serviceable third baseman, as we've seen. So I just, like, given that was the big and the only, like, material transaction for the Yankees over the offseason, I don't love it. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't love it. As just someone who was expecting Cashman to make some bolder moves and do some retooling. I mean, obviously the other big one was the Rizzo deal, which I think made sense. But I'd rather you get into the overview first, and we can keep talking about it more.
sure.
Because we'll get to the reasons why these moves are important, or good or bad, is really reflective, based on the overview of the team.
Mhm. Well, it's really interesting. You brought up, the expectations going into this offseason. It was a big shortstop class, Seager and Semien being available, and Story. So that's the thing is shortstop's been a defensive hole for the Yankees. And Connor Falefa addresses that. I will give them that. When the trade first happened, I was a little bit dismayed, mostly because trading Gary Sanchez, I was okay with. Trading him with no backup option and not getting a catcher in return freaked me out, because I don't think Kyle Higashioka is a starting catcher in the MLB. I think he's a backup. But they get a guy named Rortvelt back, who's going to be their backup to start the year, who's also hurt. And they knew it when they traded for him. So very weird there.
And it's also too, one thing you could say that's a positive is that you offloaded Gary Sanchez, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't really a good stopgap option behind Sanchez besides, you'd said, Higashioka is really more of a backup role. It's almost like the Mets counting on Tomas Nido to be the guy that catches Jacob deGrom, right?
Yeah.
He'd be catching Garrett Cole. He'd be catching Severino if he comes back and he plays to his, 2018, 2019 levels. I'm forgetting even which seasons he was injured, but 2017, 2018 levels, I should say, right? You're really working with a limited amount of talent from what we've seen, and for a rotation that really could use that stability, some question marks for sure.
I want to give a little bit of credit too, because every player has some sort of positive. And Kyle Higashioka being the everyday catcher, that could help a rotation that definitely needs it. Yeah. Defensively, Higashioka is miles ahead of Gary Sanchez. Doesn't have the same arm, so he's not going to gun guys at second trying to steal. But if it helps some of the guys' ERAs, just because, or not even ERA, because that's the earned runs, but just helping the Yankees limit bleeding, because last year they were a very terrible, fielding team. And at least I have hope now that that's the one thing, if you weren't a big fan of this trade, you have to at least admit Kiner Falefa at short is better than Glaber at short defensively, for sure. It addresses that the Yankees only batted as a team 237 last year, which is 23rd in baseball. That's not good enough. They want to be more of a contact team. And something that this offseason represents is them kind of leaning more into analytics of just getting the ball in play and moving runners over with a touch of offense, because it's not like Judge or Gallo or Stanton. They obviously are premier home run hitters. So they're trying to balance this analytics, get guys on base type guys, and the offensive just let me throw FU numbers in terms of home runs and RBIs.
Yeah.
And this is why, when we talked about doing this podcast, I think you initially, and I initially thought I was just going to rail on the Yankees, but I've come
You're
back.
You're going to do what to the Yankees?
But I've definitely come back from the ledge a little bit.
Yeah.
Donaldson is interesting. Donaldson as a defender is probably, it's kind of a sidestep with Gio. That's why I wasn't a big fan of that either, because it's you're taking on $50 million for a guy that's equivalent defensively, maybe a little bit better Donaldson, but the offense definitely a little bit of a boost over Gio. But
right,
I'll go down the lineup now. Is there anything else you wanted to say before I go down the batting order?
No, I mean, I was also going to say the same thing about Donaldson, where, the silver lining of it, I guess, like you said, is that I think you definitely are getting that upgraded third over Gio. I guess I just think that the more frustrating thing in the long term, because I mean, if you look at, I say this because if you look at Donaldson's numbers, I just pulled them up again. 26 homers, 72 RBI in 135 games, not bad by any stretch of the imagination. You probably would have hit 30 homers if he played a full season, right? If he played close to 162, he had a 247 average. So maybe you want to see it a little bit higher, but he's more of a power hitter than anything else at this stage of the game for him.
It's still better than the average on our team.
You're still better than the average on the team. And I think, The issue I just think is the price. And I think the more frustrating thing is the price and what the price means. Because what the price means is that Cashman and the Yankees have struggled to get a strategic direction going in light of what else is going on in the AL East, right? You have massive improvements made by Toronto. You have a perennial contender, top of the division in the Rays. The Red Sox have been fluctuating since the World Series win in 2018, but now they're very good again. And the Yankees have what could be a great lineup. It could be an okay lineup if people get hurt again, which you probably have to expect. But it's just doesn't feel like enough. And it doesn't feel like there's a committed direction towards investing in the team and doing that retool. It didn't seem like it was a good retool where we're building for the future, but we're also getting better now, right? It seems like we're not building for the future and we stayed roughly the same now because the Donaldson money could have been on Correa, who would have been an investment in the future without doubt. Would have been a clear upgrade at short, and then maybe you work on something at third base. You have Gio as a stopgap, and then maybe you work on getting a prospect. You work on a trade, another trade, ideally. So I think for me, like watching that, I just got frustrated because I felt like you said, what a tremendous shortstop class. It fills a need. Cashman doesn't act before the lockout, doesn't act after it, and where he does act is to just kind of
shuffle the deck a little bit,
shuffle the deck and really not put the Yankees on a certain course, right? Like, the rest of the AL East really just got better.
Except it's funny because the Rays didn't do anything, but we just know they're going to find a way because that's what they've been doing.
Yeah, I should say that too. Yeah, I mean the Red Sox and obviously Toronto with their flurry of moves in the past few years. I mean, they're my favorite to win the division, which we'll get to. But yeah, go into the lineup and we'll kind of just nitpick a bit then.
So I wrote it down on paper, as Red Letter Media would say, because I'm a boomer. So we've got Rizzo leading. So this is from CBS Sports's prediction of what their roster is going to look like in the batting order. So don't yell at me, Dan, or the commenters. The batting order, according to CBS, is going to be Rizzo, Judge, Gallo, Stanton, Donaldson, Hicks, Torres, Kiner-Falefa, Higashioka. And now I'm going to task you, Dan, as the Met fan, to pick a name out that didn't appear in that starting lineup where you're like, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be Gallo at 3, right? I mean,
I mean a guy that isn't in that lineup right now.
Oh, I didn't hear LeMahieu, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
LeMahieu is in this weird role right now because I feel like the Yanks got to figure out what they're doing with Gleyber Torres. That's like the first thing, because if Kiner-Falefa is going to play short every day, and it seems like he is because Torres is not good defensively over there, you've given LeMahieu a lot of money to just be a utility guy. I kind of just want them to trade Gleyber Torres and see if they can turn that into a 4 or a 5 or a 3 rotation guy. But we'll see. I don't know if that value is there anymore from where it was a few years ago. Maybe a team will be willing to take a chance on Torres because he's shown a lot of upside. But this lineup surprised me a little bit because I talked about, there's a couple of additions. Kiner-Falefa, I think I'm going to really like this guy. He puts bat on ball. He batted .271 last year. He would have led the Yankees in hits. He had 8 homers, 53 ribbies. So, he's not really bringing a slugging bat. He only slugged .357. That's a good idea. And his on base was only .312, which was interesting for a guy that hits pretty well, but because it sounds like he's a really aggressive hitter and he goes after pitches early in the count. But I'm okay with that. That's kind of like, the Yankees have been a very patient team. They tend to do well in terms of walks. The on-base percentage for the beginning of the lineup is actually really good. Last year, the Yanks were 9th in on-base percentage. So the Yankees Rallies, it's funny because you expect them, they're the Bronx Bombers. They've got Judge, they've got Gallo, they have Stanton, they have Rizzo. They should just be slugging the ball. But the Yankees were 17th in slugging last year. They weren't a big home run hitting team. These are the stats I was telling you, kind of changed my perception of what they are, because last year, basically their rallies would start with walks and then home runs from some of the big guys. So for me, first of all, I want Stanton to bat 3 and Gallo to bat 4 because Stanton batted 273 last year. That's awesome for him. If he's batting 273 again this year, he had 35 homers, 97 ribbies, and a 273 average. Yes, I would like more at bats for him, please. And Talking Yanks talked about this, but he actually is better offensively when he's playing in the field. So not when he's DHing. So it's going to be interesting. Gallo, I wouldn't mind Gallo DHing. Gallo batted 199 last year and hit 38 homers. That's just funny. He is like the prototypical Yankee for this lineup.
I was about to say, it's with Gallo. I mean, I'm someone that always likes, personally, I always like having hitters hit for average. I like having hitters hit north of 250 in the lineup. Over
north of 200 would be nice for Gallo.
Yeah, north of, I mean, Gallo has to just get north of 200 apparently. I mean, obviously he's a lefty, right? Like you obviously have like the big advantage in that right field porch at Yankee Stadium. It's very friendly. But yeah, I mean, I kind of agree where I think like if Stanton can play every day, I mean, notwithstanding his more extensive injury history, if he could play, if they could slot him into play and it has a correlation with him hitting better, I mean, I feel like that's something you have to do, right? I mean, like him and Judge are really going to be the foundations of this offense. Although, like you said, Kiner Falefa and Donaldson could provide that extra pop that perhaps was missing a little bit with just Gio and Glaber. But I guess you have to just worry a little bit about the strikeout rate still with the team. I mean, because like at the same time, like LeMahieu, his average dropped dramatically over the past 2 years, right?
And Donaldson's going to strike out.
And he's going to strike out, and Gallo's going to strike out. And Rizzo, I think, is definitely another anchor for the offense. So like, the pieces are here. It's just that it's like this weird situation where not only because of the division they're in and the amount of games they have to play against 3 really good teams, but also just like the streakiness of the Yankees, like if they play at home versus where they play on the road. Like I want to see what Gallo's numbers are like, which I'm sure we can pull them up. Gallo's numbers are like Yankee Stadium versus I think where he was playing in Texas for before he was traded last year. I'd be curious to see how he does Yankee Stadium versus road parks this year, and just see like, is he getting a benefit in terms of home runs? I think the biggest thing and the best thing for the lineup is to see him and Hicks improve their averages, because even if you get them up to like 230, it could be a dramatic increase in terms of the production they're going to get. I mean, Aaron Hicks is almost like the tax write-off of this team, where it's like
he's making a lot of money and
making a lot of money, not getting a lot out of it, and like you're operating at a loss, and so like all the company owners are just going to deduct that. They're not going to make any attempts to really put in a new prospect or like better it, because he's kind of been a center field mainstay when he's been healthy for the past like 8 or 9 years. So like it's kind of just like that acceptable losses kind of thing, where it's like, well, we have nothing better right now. Brett is gone, and
or is he?
Yeah, I mean, I actually picked that up this week. I haven't heard anything about him, so I'm assuming that he's done. And like, but you know what I mean? Like Hicks is just, I don't think that in the George Steinbrenner era, Hicks would have been on this team. I think
he needs to. So last year he barely played. He batted 194 in very, very shortened. Like he barely had any at bats. Right. He used to be like, they paid him for his defense. They paid him for the arm he had in the outfield. Right. When he doesn't provide that, he's kind of useless because his offense is kind of dried up. He's 33. It's going to be interesting. They have the situation where Judge played center a few times last year. And if Hicks gets hurt again, first of all, I think if Hicks is hurt and it's significant, hello, Brett Gardner again. But they also signed, they traded for Tim Castro in the offseason or last year. He's apparently incredibly fast. That I kind of like. I mean, your center fielder needs to be kind of nimble. The Yankee corner outfielders are giants, regardless of if Gallo or Stanton's playing, and Judge, obviously. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Hicks, if they don't get him to bounce back, look at that. I mean, listen to the splits in home runs from the top end of this lineup, or just offense in general, from the top end of the lineup. So 1-5 versus 6-9. Rizzo last year, 22 homers, 61 RBIs, 248, 344, 440. So he gets on base still. He walks a lot. Judge, 39 homers, 98 RBIs, 287 average, 373 on base. Gallo, 38 homers, 199 average. We talked about that. Stanton, we talked about. Donaldson, 26 homers, 72 ribbies, 247. Honestly, pretty good for a guy that's getting up there in age. And 352 on base. So the top of the lineup gets on base, can hit for power.
Yeah.
That's great. The drop-off, Hicks batted 194, obviously played not a lot last year. Torres batted 259 with 9 homers. This guy hit 30 a few years ago. I think the juice balls have something to do with that too. Kinder Falefa, we already talked about, 271 average. That's good. And he's here for that. He's not here for pop. Higashioka batted 181. That is my worry, is that it's just the catching position is just not going to hit this year.
It's a
That's just a dead zone.
I'm telling you.
It's going to be good defensively, terrible offensively.
So like all of it is to say, really, like the offense is probably not going to be the concern. I mean, the concern like is really, which we hardly even touched on, is probably going to just be the health and the consistency of the rotation too.
That's a good segue, because I have some stats. They're a little bit surprising. So I think we would agree the Yankees barely did anything in the offseason to their pitching core in general, like bullpen or starting. And
which is
there are some
frustrating.
stats. There are some stats that it was very frustrating, because I feel like if the Yankees got Scherzer, I would expect them to still find a way to make the playoffs.
Yeah,
like it's that much on a knife's edge. You know, there, like you said, there's a lot of questions. The lineup, as CBS Sports has it, is very top heavy and then falls off drastically. And I think the Yankees have decided, let's just get the back half of that lineup to hit for average as much as possible. Add Kinder Falefa there. Don't ask Torres to hit a lot of home runs. Just ask him to get on.
Yeah.
The pitching, though, last year, where would you guess the Yankees ERA as a team was?
Probably not top 10, probably top 15.
Sixth.
Really? Oh,
they had a 3.74 ERA as a team. Their WHIP, so allowing runners on base, where do you think they were?
Top 10.
Sixth, again.
Right. Okay.
And their bullpen ERA was 4th with a 3.58. I mean, their WHIP was 121, by the way. But all that said, I feel like, you know, like just by your guess on the first one, and I probably would have guessed something similar for ERA. You know, just not having been in the baseball mind recently and being busy. I forgot that their bullpen, which is not a bunch of like huge names, obviously Chapman's there, and Chapman was decent last year. They have Chad Green, who strikes out a lot of guys and gives them a lot of innings. Jonathan Loizaga, Clay Holmes, like these names, Lucas Litke, Wandy Peralta, these guys that you would never pick out of a crowd in terms of like,
right,
I don't know, their name, if you're a baseball fan. And they did it last year. And maybe I got to give Boone a little more credit than I usually do, because the bullpen held up. The rotation is the big question. So we'll go right to that. Cole was a little bit off last year, but generally gave them about what they needed. And it's more so they don't have enough depth. They do nothing to the rotation. They lose Kluber, although they lost him to injury early last year. So they're used to playing without Kluber. Montgomery is probably going to be asked to be the 2 to start the year. It's a bit of an issue. He has a 383, had a 383 ERA last year. That's actually not bad, and I'll take it. I don't know if that's 2. That's more of like a mid part of the rotation, like a 3-4.
That's like
I'm comfortable with him as that.
That's like a 3-4, but he needs to be a 2 because Severino is his status is a complete question mark.
Yes, and as we were saying before we got on, or before we went live, Severino had a start pushed back today. I just basically, I hate that it's like this because he had such a great start to his career, but I just assume that he's not going to be a rotation guy, you know, for any significant stretch of this year. I just, you know, even once they get him back up to full speed, I feel like he's just going to get hurt again. That's just the way it is. And I feel like as the GM, Brian Cashman really should have thought that way and not assumed that he could have been the 2 or 3, because they're.
And that's just the most frustrating thing too, because in the past we've talked about how Cashman was great at making contingency plans, like 3-4 years ago in like 2018 and 2019, where Cashman was making. I think in 2019, that was the year where a lot of the starting lineup was out for fairly significant periods, and they had guys like Mike Tauchman come up and hit. I think that's when we first saw Luke Voit hit the scene with the Yankees. I can't remember exactly, but I think so. Because then in 2020 he led the league in homers in the 60-game season, right? Like this was when these Glaber really came of age, so to speak, in 2019. Like
going back further, Didi, because I have to mention Didi.
Miguel Andahar, did he play that year? I forget.
Which year?
2019. I think in 2018 he played, and in 2019 he was out.
Yeah, he's been kind of down for a couple of years. He's still on the roster. He's listed as a bench player right now.
Right. And it's like, but the point was like he had this really solid depth, and it's just kind of like where I said it's back to like the write-off philosophy of like, what is the direction of this team, right? Like because, like you said, Kluber, you're done with, even though he was pretty good last year. Severino needs to be treated as a question mark for the sake of planning a rotation for a season. Montgomery is the de facto 2. Nestor Cortez could be pretty good, but like again, like it's a bit of an untested question mark.
Yeah, you just never know.
And it's just like that. You're ending up with a lot of contingencies and a lot of if this goes right, and if this goes right, and if this goes right, and if this goes right, will be good. Not even like stellar. Not even like we can expect 90 wins minimum. Like I used to think like that, where there was this when I was growing up, and I used to just be like, well, if Beltran's healthy all season and LaDuca hits 315 again, and we get a full season at a right, and Delgado doesn't get hurt, and he does what he's supposed to do, and like the bullpen's good, and Oliver Perez pitches to a 3.30 ERA, and like all of a sudden there's like 7 hypotheticals here that like all have to be true for you to get to the playoffs, and like generally the best teams don't have those hypotheticals. They have 1, maybe 2, and it's like everyone else is performing up to expectations. They're consistent. The job of the GM is to have those contingencies thought of. I mean, Sandy Alderson as team president last year with the Mets did a great job, outfitting the bench. Turns out it was very needed. They weren't like the greatest players in the world to have, playing a sustained period of time, but they were excellent bench stopgaps that ended up being just enough in the certain, in May and June where there were a lot of injuries. Cashman used to be good at that. That's why I'm like frustrated, as not even a Yankee fan, but just watching the team kind of sputter in this like direction of you're doing some things right, but there's other obvious things that are just not being fixed.
Yeah.
And like, it's creating other problems that will have to be dealt with. Whereas if there was more of an eye to the longer term development, Cashman probably doesn't do the Donaldson deal. He probably signs Correa, and he probably goes after Rodon. And then if you have Correa and Rodon on this team, what kind of credibility does that give you? It's an instant boost for this season, right? I mean, like you really get that's like a difference maker right there. If you have those two, and you sign Rizzo again, I think the Yankees are a wild card team.
It's going to be interesting because the depth argument, this year it's going to be something that is not something the Yankees have done in a while, but they like you mentioned a few years ago, it was like these nice depth, like what looked like random trades. Who's this Didi Gregorius guy? Who's this Luke Voit guy that we got for Chase and Shreve? Who's this Mike Tauchman guy? I think it shows that Cashman, I have to give him credit because I am really hard on him, but he has an eye for, or he plus the scouting department have an eye for these guys that like are very underrated. They make a move and then they're great.
Right.
The interesting thing this year is if they're not making these big moves, if they're not getting a Story, a Seager, a Rodon, a Scherzer, in the pitching department, I think that shows at least actually in both areas, because right now the rotation, I didn't mention the whole thing, but Cole, Montgomery, Severino, Tyone, Cortez, they must trust the kids. Like I think the Yankees would go out and get guys if they didn't trust their kids. So at shortstop, it's interesting. I think overall the team has a 2-year plan, and it's basically they filled a couple of holes. Donaldson is 2 years left. I believe Connor Falefa has 2 years left on his deal. They signed Rizzo for 2 years. It's going to be very interesting. And basically catcher is a dead hole waiting for Austin Wells, who's their top catching prospect. That must, it puts a lot of pressure on somebody like Anthony Volpe, who's that top shortstop prospect for the Yankees. But, does that show that they really, really believe in Anthony Volpe being as good as, acquiring Correa now in a few years. In the rotation, if you're assuming Severino is going to be hurt and we have Herman on the year starting on the IL, Davy Garcia is still only like 23 or something. Luis Heel and Clark Schmidt. These guys are with Severino being hurt, they're going to get shots.
Clark Schmidt is such a Yankees name from like 1984, batting behind Mattingly, Clark Schmidt, cleanup hitter, something like that. Like it's like, I mean, I know I think he's a reliever, right?
He was a starting pitcher prospect, and the Yankees website depth chart lists him as a depth rotation guy.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think, and Michael King is in that group too. It's going to be really interesting. Something that what's up?
Might be the 2-year plan might be what Cashman is angling for. Now that you kind of put the pieces together there, like that is definitely something. It's something. It's some kind of committing to a course that's going to be, it gives Orients fans a bit and gives them more of an idea of what to expect. Where it's like, all right, maybe it's not as competitive this year. Maybe we do miss the playoffs by a couple of games, but we're building back to allowing these prospects to get better, which in those years where you're out of it, that's really what you can ask for, right? Yeah. So maybe that is what it, maybe that this is more of a retool than we initially thought.
Yeah. So I'm basically giving Cashman a little bit more credit than I gave him, because it's not the typical way that the Yankees do it. The Yankees of old would have put everything on the table for Matt Olson, or, a bunch of the names I listed, Scherzer, Correa, Freddie Freeman, maybe.
Yeah, they didn't put everything on the table, but we certainly did.
Yeah. Well, the Scherzer one definitely still annoys me, because like I said, I think the Yankees could do enough this year to stay in it that they would be a Scherzer away, possibly in the rotation,
I think,
from
for sure,
a playoff spot. Because, they're with 3 playoff spots now, the Yankees should be in it. We'll talk about when we get to expectations, but I don't think they're going to be bad.
No, definitely not bad. It's just that you're also in the poor luck of a really good really good division. But I guess we should maybe pivot to the Mets a little bit now. Yes. You mentioned Scherzer, and
give us your spiel, Dan. What do you think of the Mets? Wait. First, I want you to just have fun with the fact that they went out and got names. Dan, I'm giving you permission to gloat. Enjoy what they did the offseason.
It really, look, I mean, I'm a Met fan, so I'm going to, 25 years of this is really helped temper your expectations to even when things look really, really good. Like a 2007 kind of situation where you lead you lead your division for 130 games, and you think that the playoffs are all but certain. You're about to repeat. You're about to avenge 2006, and then you blow it in the last 3 weeks. That almost looks like what happened with 2021. That's almost what looks like what happened with 2019, right? That's what happened with 2016. 2015 was a fun surprise year that I think will live on in memory for a while. But the past 6 years or so has really been about this coming to terms with let's recapture that 2015 magic. Let's recapture that kind of run. And the fact is, you can't recapture magic, because magic is just,
bullshit. It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. It's
I'm sorry, kids.
It's hard to put, it's hard to give it, I hate using terms like the definition of this, but it's really hard to define magic and momentum and things like that in sports, because there's just this, kind of ineffable feeling of it, and this kind of internal drive that makes things happen in those kinds of special runs that you go on. So that it's hard to reproduce that, and the Mets kind of have those seasons where they dominate, 1986, 1969, 1999, 2000, 2006, where you really feel like you're on this current, and there's more, you're part of something bigger than just the Mets. You're kind of part of this current of momentum and success that has to drive them, right? Whereas we haven't really had that since. And I think a lot of what's happened since 2019 is that attempt to kind of get that back with some of the same
money.
with money, with some of the same players. And what it's done is that it's led us to just realize, which I think is a good thing, we needed to realize in 2021 into 2022, to start off with, we had to realize that Noah and Conforto, and as integral as they were to our team in the mid 2010s, were just not getting it done for whichever reason, right? They're good players, but just with the two of them, I just picked them because they're the two that didn't resign. It's better that they didn't resign, in my opinion, because I think we needed to kind of cut losses and acknowledge that they weren't as good as the fan base would have liked them to be. We liked that we acquired these guys in smart trades or in developed into the farm system. We like that. Everybody does. But we kind of clung to that and kept getting disappointed when guys were hurt, when Conforto was predictably streaky like he's been for the past 5-6 years. When Syndergaard had a second Tommy John surgery. Second, I forget, because he's been out so much. These things that could have been predictable should have been predictable. And having injuries every year kind of derailing successful seasons. I mean, see DeGrom last year, right? As a Met fan, back to my original point, it's hard to not have your, to get too excited and have your, expectations tempered a bit, because the fact is stuff's going to happen. The Mets are going to be the Mets. But I will say something feels a little different about this year.
Okay, that's good, because I was going to say you're very bad at gloating.
Yeah, well, that was a long roundabout way of saying that we can't recapture the magic and we have to stop trying to. And I think we finally did. We stopped trying and we just said,
we used another M word.
Yes, money. We used another M word, money and power and dirty money, because it's Cohen's and it's great. Okay, so I think we finally stopped trying to chase the magic of 2015, excuse me. In 2022, we're kind of embracing the idea that to win in the 2020s, it's going to take the other M word. It's going to take money, and it's just going to take a lot of it, and it's going to take roster stacking. And if you're not roster stacking, you're doing a mini retool or you're doing a full rebuild. And we can't afford to have another rebuild, and we can't afford to have another retool because we spent that much money. So I think for the Mets, the big takeaway before I get into the lineup is going to be, as it almost always is, it's just going to be about health and consistency and staying on the field with the rotation, and a little bit less so with the offense, but especially with the rotation. For all of the gloating, and here's the temperament part, for all the gloating about how awesome it is to have the richest owner in the sport who can just dump his money into the team for 20 years, operate at a loss, and still have like $13 billion, it's great. But we did incur some risk. I mean, the fact is Carrasco and Lindor have not worked out the way that we needed them to. Although Lindor is absolutely tearing the shit out of the ball in spring training, but he did that last year too, and then he had a very lukewarm season. Carrasco pitched only 6 games this year, which no one was expecting. Everybody kept saying, well, when Carrasco gets back at end of April, and then end of April came and it was, well, when he gets back in mid-June, and then
that's going to be Severino.
Yeah, exactly. And we got August, and we got the Mets were kind of we're entering out of the playoff race because we completely collapsed by early August. And we got Carrasco getting a 6 ERA in 6 starts. His ERA was 6, and his WHIP was 1.4. And
that's good.
Yeah. We have to. It's good until you realize that his career WHIP is 1.15. So it's really that's, if you want temperament, that's it. Carrasco and Walker are 2 pieces of this team that absolutely have to be pretty good for this to kind of work. Now, you might raise a counter and say, well, wait a second, you have DeGrom, you have Scherzer, and you have Bassett, and that is all true, and that might be the best 1, 2, 3 in baseball, and I would put that up against any other team's 1, 2, 3.
Milwaukee.
However, we're looking at Milwaukee. Yeah, that's the other. Well, yeah, you're right. Milwaukee's probably just as good, if not better, because
it's hard to say. They're
Woodruff,
both pretty stacked.
Burns, Woodruff, and Peralta, or you can flip Woodruff and Burns, just the same way you can flip DeGrom and Scherzer. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
It's all about stacking the front end of that rotation. That works come playoff time.
It does. And that's the thing that's encouraging, is that if the Mets get in, I think they can go far. But DeGrom and Scherzer need to be healthy, and Carrasco needs to dramatically improve. And I'd feel very comfortable about this team. And I actually think if Carrasco gets there, we could possibly win the division.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a little bit off, and that's more in the projections section. But I guess to just kind of go through like the team overview, I mean, there's a lot of these things that, in terms of like eliminating the contingencies that I mentioned a little bit earlier with the Yankees, the Mets did a pretty good job of eliminating contingencies, right? Like, and I think I'm pretty satisfied in terms of what we could have gotten out of the offensive additions. I mean, you have Starling Marte, who
Mm-hmm.
immediately is going to hit towards 300, you hope, um, which is something the Mets sorely needed after they got rid of Chili Davis. I still say is the worst decision they've made in a long time. But that's besides the point. Their other hitting coach was horrendous. And Chili Davis was great at communicating with our younger players like McNeil, Smith, and Conforto, for example, all of whom experienced down years after he left last year. Coincidence? Probably not. Eric Chavez has dumbed things down a little bit out of the analytics department, whereas we went from an extreme of, an overproduction of analytics information per the player reports from them disclosing to the media about what they found confusing and not helpful from last year's presentations to now, where Eric Chavez is speaking a lot more in terms of traditional baseball, perspective. And it seems to be working for some guys. And that's kind of what we need. So I think where you look at the Mets eliminating those contingencies, I mean, you have other players, some veteran players coming over that are going to immediately lend some credibility to the lineup. I mean, we finally have a more or less legitimate third baseman with Escobar, which has been a hole for us for several years. You have legitimate outfield. You have a good veteran outfield with Marte and Canna and Nimmo, who you can call a veteran, I think, at this point. And I think you have a great top of the lineup. I mean, with Nimmo and Marte hitting 1 or 2, respectively, or you can flip that. I mean, you're looking at a situation where Marte can get on and immediately steal second and third. Nimmo can walk, or he can knock him in. And let's say Nimmo
You mean he'll
walks.
run?
Yeah, runs. Yeah, exactly. And like you're immediately looking at a situation where you can call in a Lindor or you can call in a McNeil. If McNeil kind of gets back up to his 300 level form, which is another big part of this offense. And you're kind of in business because then you have the ideal power hitter in Pete Alonso, who I think is going to have a tremendous year after, so many other Mets had a down year and Pete didn't. I think that speaks a lot to Pete's ability to kind of stick to his own routine and be consistent regardless of what's around him, which is going to be important for this year because we have a new hitting coach again. Um, him, Escobar, Smith, and Canna, I can't say I dislike that 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, the thing is, there's kind of a question mark as to where McNeil will hit. I mean, you could say you could plug him in at 3, you could plug him in at 9. I had him at 9 earlier when I was making alternate lineups because ideally, if he's hitting the bat well, swinging the bat well, sorry, hitting the ball well, you're looking at a situation where he could be hitting close to 300 and kind of help stacking the deck for Marte and Nimmo behind him. And you're looking at giving Lindor and McNeil and Alonso that many more RBI opportunities. And I really like that. I like that versatility to the Mets lineup. I like that you can slot Nimmo in the 1, 2, or the 9 position, and you can really help get that back end consistency that they're looking for. I can't say I have a lot of complaints about it. Would it have been nice to go for a Chris Bryant, like I was saying over the offseason? Yeah, obviously it would have. Would it have put the Mets payroll at like a ridiculously high level, even more than it already is? Yeah, and like we need that flexibility for when we have to extend certain guys like DeGrom next year. So I think that's probably why we didn't do it. But
and
I think
eventually Polar Bear as well.
Yeah, eventually Pete. And I think the big thing too is just having Buck Showalter come in and be I think instantly give some credibility to our front office's strategic planning here. I think is important, right?
He's
Because
a
I think
funny guy too. That's very important.
And like he's funny, and I think he relates well to players, and he relates well to the media, and he kind of just enjoys the job. I mean, like earlier, I was watching an interview with him where someone asked him, they call you the best manager who's never won a World Series. What do you think of that? And he just says, I don't think about that. He's like, or I try not to. He's like, I don't think that.
Shut up, get out.
Yeah. Yeah. He gave a good answer. He just said, it's not going to define me. He's like, I love what I do. I have a blessed life kind of thing, so to speak. And he left it at that. And I think he has that kind of good attitude where obviously he's been through a tremendous amount of baseball, but also he has that eye towards, he has a good perspective, I think, on just the problems that will arise and how to handle them. He doesn't seem like anything bothers him too much. We don't have a Mickey Callaway situation where he's picking fights with the media and then like, committing sexual harassment off camera. We don't have a Luis Rojas situation either, where he's getting second guessed and he's getting a little hot under the collar all the time.
Yeah, he's our problem now. He's our third base coach.
Yeah, he's your third base coach,
Yep.
and I liked Luis. Don't get me wrong. I did. I think we needed a veteran manager. And I think that with the Bullpens, we were never going to get that kind of spending there. So I think like the lineup, I don't have as many issues with. The key again is going to be, I think, three hitters. I think the key is going to be Lindor, McNeil, and Smith, right? Because McNeil's average dropped from around 300. I think it was about 311 in like 2020, or I think he hit like 319 in 2019 to 251 in 2021. I mean, it's a dramatic drop. And so did Lindor's. Lindor hit, I think, north of 270, and now he hit under 240 in 2021. And we're dealing with a Mets lineup that in 2019 was that was the last really good offensive year for the team. That lineup was third in MLB, and that's when we had our last winning season. It was we had 86 wins. I just think that for this lineup to work, that has to be the priority in getting those players to kind of come back and regress to the mean a little bit. I mean, it's a bit of a big assumption that not just one, not just two, but three players will be regressing to the mean. But I also think that with kind of a reset at coaching, it's more possible than not. I mean, I think if we were to keep hitting coaching, I think Mets fans would have rioted, especially after we got Scherzer, because then we just say, well, great, now we're not going to support Scherzer either. But I think like that's going to be the most critical part of the Mets offense, because I think every other area of it in terms of the lineup is probably stable and consistent. Those three are going to be very important. I mean, you also have Davis, who ended up having a pretty good year. He hit 285. He had a really, a good role for the Mets in 2019, where he was a great bench bat. He hit like almost 400 at Citi Field in over like 60 or 70 games. They're trying to get him back to that form, but 285 we'll take, right? Like we'll take that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Comes in as a DH, right? We'll take that. We can take 285. I think you bench Robinson Cano for 162 games.
Well, I think he's going to be DHing a little bit, maybe.
Yeah,
probably not great in the field anymore, I would think.
His spring training has just been so, like, I think we just write that off and just say, see you later. Like, I think we just buy out his contract. I really just think at this point, that's what we do. And we just cut the losses. And I think, honestly, I really think that Steve Cohen would do it if we didn't have Jake's extension coming up, because like, we should just say, forget it. We'll pay you more right now to just quit baseball or quit this team rather. I know that we obviously have budgeted for the next 2 years anyway, his contract, and that's probably why we're not disturbing it. But because a buyout would probably require us to pay more upfront, I'm assuming, and he doesn't want to do that. But yeah, like he's just been terrible, and there's just no spot for him on this team. Like, I think today Buck was like, let's try to slot him in at first to give him some more defensive versatility, and I'm just like.
He's never played first in his life, and he's like in his mid-30s.
He's like 40, and he's playing first base for the first. Like, he's played about 20 games at first as a Mariner in like 2018, right?
Oh my god, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he did. I saw like Newsday reported or something like that. No, New York Post. Yeah, because that's what we need. We need someone that's played like less than 20 games there out of like thousands of games in his career. We need someone like that playing first, a 40-year-old. No. If we want versatility, I mean, there's better options. I mean, McNeil already can play second or third or left field. Smith can play first or left field. Why not just slot Smith in as first baseman, put Pete in as the DH when he needs a break, and keep that tandem going? Make Smith the DH in the first base on a rotation basis. And do the same thing with Alonso, but obviously start him more than not. And when Smith doesn't start at first, make him the de facto DH. I don't see why Cano has to slot into this at all, other than money.
I think that's a spot that you look at as a potential trade for the Mets close to the deadline. I think they're going to give Pete a chance to work out the kinks defensively at first, because it seems like Pete's, he seems like a really hardworking guy, and that he's been working on his defense in the offseason. So I think they're going to give him some time to, play through it a little bit, see if he's gotten better. And I think even if he has gotten a little bit better at the deadline, you look for it doesn't even have to be a good offensive player. You look for just like a defensive first baseman. With the DH, the Mets can be a lot more, they can play with their lineup a little bit more. Come the trade deadline. I don't know if the Yankees are out of it. Maybe they get Rizzo because Rizzo is pretty good defensively.
Maybe. I just don't see the Mets going for or needing necessarily another bat this year. I mean, God willing. But I really think if they're going to make any moves at the deadline, it's going to be a rotation move. Because I think that by then we're going to see if Carrasco is upholding his end of the bargain or if Walker is upholding his end of the bargain. Obviously, Walker had a fantastic first half, but struggled a lot in the second half. And we thought that at the time, I remember we said that might be due to injury. Because
he had a weird year.
And he had a weird year where
he was coming off of cancer, right?
Carrasco was. Walker was coming off of surgery.
Sorry, yes, I meant Carrasco. Right. Walker, yeah, I think we said for a lot of last year, it might have been the back half because he had Tommy John, right?
Yeah, I think he had Tommy John, and
so I think maybe
pitched that many innings in a couple of years.
Yes.
So it was.
So maybe this year it'll be better. Like his arm just a little bit less, or a little bit more mileage back on it. Being, I guess, having last year as an experience, maybe it just perfectly works out that this year the timing works out so that he is the 4 the whole year. I think he's the 4, and it's going to be interesting if McGill and Peterson can win the 5 job.
I was going to talk about that. I mean, it's funny to just say, like, in terms of the givens plus the versus the contingencies, how little we've even talked about Jake and Max here because they're just the givens. They're the 2 best givens you could have in the entire world.
But, and they fortified it with Bassett.
And they fortified with Bassett, which might prove to be the most important move they did make this year. I mean, post Scherzer, but
that's good insurance on one of those top 2 guys getting hurt.
That's a great quintessential 3. Like you talked about the quintessential 3. It's a great quintessential 3. I mean, like Jordan Montgomery can probably get there in a couple seasons, but I mean, Bassett was an all-star. I think he had 3.14 ERA. It's just like, you don't need him to have ace numbers, although that'd be great. But I just sometimes also think, what if we just got Syndergaard in the QO? It would be so much fun to have Syndergaard in the first.
I've been saying for a while, I'm not a big believer in the Angels. So maybe at the deadline, the Mets are.
I'm thinking we maybe trade for him and we give up maybe if they need the Angels. I mean, hard to believe it because they have Ohtani and Trout, but maybe if they need some kind of offensive help or some flexibility, we give them Davis or Smith. Because
they still have Justin Upton roaming the outfield, so I think they could use somebody a little bit younger.
Yeah, and I just think that look for rotation help at the deadline as of right now, because I just think that, assuming the lineup can stay healthy, which of course for us is always a big assumption, that's really where the holes are going to be. Carrasco, I really think that the success of this year comes down to about 5 players. It's Lindor, McNeil, Smith, Carrasco, and Walker. And I think everybody else is relatively free of contingencies, or they're minor, or they're not foreseeable. If someone really gets hurt that doesn't have a history of getting hurt, it's not foreseeable, right? Like things will happen. But on the whole, I mean, I'm happy with this team. The problem also is that we play in a hard division now again. Philadelphia and Atlanta are both good teams. Obviously, Atlanta's the world champion, although I think I wouldn't rate them quite as high as I rate, the Dodgers, for example, but or perhaps even the Giants. But I think that I really think the Mets could be the first wild card team. Kind of like segueing into the projections, I really think that the Mets are probably like a 92 win team if things work out, and if things work out beyond expectations, probably like a 96 win team, or possibly higher. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. So I was going to ask you, So you've given me the win totals. I was going to ask. So you think in the 92 to 96 range?
I think probably 90 to 92 range.
Okay.
But I said 92. I'm going to say 92. I'm going to go with 90 because I'm high on the Mets. That's my high number. Because I know
being high on the Mets is a little different.
Yeah, I know that shit is going to happen, and I know that someone's going to get hurt. Bassett, DeGrom, sure, someone is going to get hurt, and then we're going to get stuck with Carrasco and Peterson, as the top of the rotation. And if that happens, forget it. We're back to 75 wins. But I think 92 wins is attainable, and I think that it's not unreasonable to think that that's enough to be a wild card team, especially with the expanded format. I really do. Yeah. If not being the top seed, I think right now, the Mets, the Giants, and the Phillies are probably the 3 best wild card teams. The Brewers are right there. The Padres could be right there. But whoever doesn't win the Central, it's probably, if it's Brewers or Cardinals, obviously whoever's not winning it. I'm assuming the Cardinals will probably edge out the Brewers, but that could change. The Cardinals kind of had a renaissance year for themselves last year too, after it looked like they might be done. So we'll see. But yeah, 92 wins, I think. I would say 92 wins with potential for more, but these things have to work. We have to figure it out with those 5 players to watch and see what they do. Now, if McNeil and Lindor are hitting less than 250 again in like May, it's going to reflect in the lineup. We have more insurance, but they're RBI guys for us. McNeil is an on base and an RBI guy for us. Lindor is an RBI guy for us. We need that production in the middle of the lineup. And if we're not getting it, Pete can't always do that. Escobar can't always do that. We're going to be in trouble.
See, for me in the NL, I have a bit of a different perspective because I think Milwaukee is going to run away with the Central.
They might.
I think.
Yeah.
I'm really, really high on them. I don't know if I believe them in the playoffs because I have adopted this rule over the last few years to never believe in either Central division come playoff time, because the last couple of years at least have gotten to just beat up on teams. And then you look at their record when you start making predictions for the playoffs and you go, Milwaukee won. The White Sox won 100 and something games. Oh, wait, they just beat up on terrible teams the whole year. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be as bad this year because I think the competition is a little bit better. But I think the Mets, my expectations for the Mets, 92 to 96 for me. I think they could win the division. I think they should. My expectation is they should be in the race for the division into the last week of the year. That should be like a battle with the Braves, in my opinion, which is, I think, what most people are saying, at least for the East.
And don't sleep on the Phillies, too. I mean, the Phillies they might have the strongest lineup in the East and probably one of the best in the NL. Their lineup might rival the Dodgers in terms of its potency. I mean, you have probably one of the best catchers in the NL. I mean, Will Smith being the other, right? Real Muto, and that's like a guy that hits like 270, right? You have Rhys Hoskins, you have Didi, you have a really good outfield, probably the best outfield in.
You got Castellanos.
You have Castellanos.
He's going to hit home runs during every major tragedy.
Yeah, and then you have Kyle Schwarber, who probably doesn't slot that well into the Mets lineup because we needed a few more guys that hit for average. But I did not want to see him go to Philly or a division rival, and he went to Philly. So don't sleep on Philly. I mean, Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola are dangerous.
I think it all hinges on Aaron Nola.
I think it's going to be fun to see the Mets and Phillies rivalry get reignited again because, there's definitely some, bad blood. We don't like Rhys Hoskins.
Yeah.
He hates us.
Who does?
I mean, no one really does, right? I mean, it's kind of, he does this thing where, last season he had a couple of games at City where he'd homer and he would, take an obnoxiously long home run route. And it's just really, just leaves a bad taste in the mouth. So I'm thinking, we're going to see a revival of that. And I think it's going to be fun because, the NL is better when the Mets and Phillies hate each other.
Yeah.
That's, kind of our only existing rivalry. And it died out in the 2010s because, we both cooled off. And we were good when they were bad and they were good when we were bad. And it just didn't really, we weren't both good at the same time. We were in 07 and 08.
And it's not as fun when you both suck.
No, it's not. It's more when the Yankees, in the Red Sox in the mid 2010s, it was just they didn't suck, but it was just what are we watching?
Yeah. I think just the intensity dropped off a little bit because I think maybe they just didn't want to get back into punching Don Zimmer type, hitting A-Rod with pitches type stuff.
Yeah, no, they don't want to watch Pedro commit a felony.
They wanted him to pull a Will. You know what? Maybe we'll get a Will Smith and Chris Rock this year. We'll have a Yankee player go to the mound real slowly and slap him.
Yeah.
So for me,
where the Yankees?
Okay, yeah. For me, for the Yankees, it's really changed over the last week. Kind of basically everything I talked about. Their pitching is a little bit better than I thought. Although this year, it's going to take a breakout from Garcia, Heel, Schmidt, King. One of those guys is going to have to be a starting pitcher at some point this year, assuming Severino just, is spotty. Yeah. I think that,
assuming Severino is good, which is a big assumption.
Yeah.
What do you think the ceiling is for the team before you give your prediction?
So if Severino, who has a career 3.43 ERA when healthy, were to play full time and give us that, I would pick this team to be a wild card team. Probably not the top one. Probably in that 2-3. If they had Scherzer, I would have them in that 2-3. As it stands, the AL is really good. The Astros, people are forgetting because the Astros didn't really do anything in the offseason, but they are still a really good team. Really good. They have homegrown guys that have made up for losing Springer and Correa. Tucker
again, it's. I think they're my pick to win the AL. Although I think Houston, Toronto would be a fun ALCS, and I think hoping for that because I think watching Vlad Guerrero Jr. and the crew of young Toronto players taking on Houston's players would be a lot of fun for the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing Toronto make the World Series for the first time in like 30 years would be very cool. It is like almost, I think it's the 30th anniversary of when they won, and they won 92 and 93. I think they did.
I think so.
Joe Carter was the 93 year. I think they were in it in both years.
Yeah, because 94 was the lockout.
Yeah, the Phillies might have won in 92. I forget, but I think they won both years. I think Toronto.
Because they had back-to-back, I think, the Blue Jays.
So that was 30 years ago, right? Yeah. You have, there's going to be some fun lineage there, some history that I think will maybe come back at Rogers Center, which is pretty cool. The other thing, too, is that the AL West is definitely better. I think that's going to be a fun division to watch because now Seattle is awoken. I think for me, I think I want Seattle to be a wild card team. I want them to kind of go on a run like they did last year, and I think they could do it, but it's going to be tough given that Boston and Tampa are also going to be right on the heels of Toronto, or Toronto is going to be on the heels of Tampa, or they're on the heels of Boston, right? So safe to say, I think 2 out of the 3 from the AL are going to be in the AL East. Whether that's, and that could be the Yankees too, but
no, I agree definitely. I think the AL East is going to have 3 playoff teams at minimum. Like the AL East could run the whole wild card because though the Twins got better for sure, and they finessed the Yankees. Make no mistake. Getting rid of $50 million from Josh Donaldson and then using it to pay Carlos Correa. That is good stuff. So for me, the Yankees, the real expectation is I think they're going to be that 4th team that just misses the wild card because I think it's going to be 2 AL East. And as of right now, I guess I'm giving the 3rd to Seattle.
Yeah, I'm doing the same. I'm giving my 3rd to the Seattle. I think it's going to be Toronto, Boston, and Seattle, or Tampa, Boston, and Seattle. And probably,
you know what? I'm going to be a little bit bold. I'm going to make an on-air decision last minute. I'm going to pick the Yankees as the 3rd wild card.
All right.
It
could happen.
I very much came back on them. Looking at the lineup, looking at the averages, the on base, it will come down to if they find a way to acquire a starting pitcher at some point, if they make that trade, everybody's talking about possibly with the A's to get either Frankie Montas or Sean Manaea, then I really will start to think again. I'm not going to get super hyped. I'm not expecting any playoff series wins. Basically, I'm just I feel like their upside is 1st round exit, unfortunately. I think anything above that would be a complete success of a season. I think, honestly, a failure would just be not really competing for the wild card.
I think for the Mets, because I know you asked about it before we went on, for the Mets, what a successful year would look like for us. I think you got to say a division series win, to be totally honest, because I think that we have the tools to get through the wild card game with DeGrom. You have a 1 game, let's say we're the top wild card seed, so we play the 1 game playoff or whatever the format's going to be, because I actually am not even sure now.
I think it's best of 3 now. Which the Mets are built for.
We're built for that. Yeah, exactly. 1, 2, 3. Well, actually, maybe not even a 1, 2, 3. Maybe just a 1, 2, and then just pray to God that the bullpen holds the win in the second game, or the first game. But I don't think you can make an excuse as to losing a wild card game with Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer on your team. I mean, I think in worst case scenario, you do what we just did this Sunday, which was you pitch deGrom for 6 and Scherzer for 3 or 5 and 4 or something like that, and you just dominate them. And then you get like 1 or 2 runs to scrape across the plate, and you call it a day.
How crazy would that be to watch in a wild card game? Like
that's what you're going to see. I'm telling you, if we're in the wild card,
absolutely. Caution to the wind.
You're going to see, I mean, it's a 1-game playoff. It's a game 7, right? So, and I think even then, with the way you can structure rotation, having Bassett start game 1 of a DS, you could do worse,
Oh, absolutely.
You could totally do worse. And then from there, with a couple days rest, you start deGrom on 4 days rest or whatever it is after that. And then you got to deal with Bassett, deGrom, Scherzer, possibly Bassett again, and possibly, Scherzer or deGrom again. And I don't think that with the rotation we have and the way that you've seen rotations get structured in the playoffs in the last 4 or 5 years with, opener games scheduled just to give the starters like a break from being ridiculous.
You'd like to avoid that if you can.
Yeah. And I mean,
unless you're the Rays, and then it works out. It always works out.
For us, the problem with that is we're probably going to be staring down like the Dodgers, or we're going to be staring down. I mean, I think we can beat Milwaukee or we can beat St. Louis, but
I want to see that Milwaukee pitching matchup.
I would love to see a Mets-Milwaukee matchup in like a DS format, because that would be a lot of fun.
There will be 4
I wanted that
total
last
runs.
year. I really did want that last year when I thought we had, Syndergaard and Carrasco were going to come back. There was a time where we thought that was going to be the ideal matchup last year, and it wasn't. I really think you got to get to the NLCS. If you get in, you got to get to the NLCS. Mm-hmm. And I think from there, it's like, all right, first time we're here in 7 years, we can be happy. But then, there comes a point where it's like, oh shit, this is for real. Then usually that feeling hits when you get past the DS and you're in the NLCS and you're like, all right, now we have to, every step you take suddenly is fraught with second guessing and, decision making. But that for me, unfortunately, we've just upped the ante a lot. When you spend this kind of money and you get the kind of talent we brought in, it's up the ante. And I think, it's probably got to be the NLCS for a successful year. Although, don't get me wrong, I will be very happy with the competitive DS that we lose to the Dodgers or something.
Mm-hmm.
We're back.
Yeah, if you're losing to the Dodgers at any point, it can't be a huge disappointment, because it's they're a perfect baseball team.
If we lose out to Philadelphia, I will be pissed. Not only because it's Philly and I hate them, but because that's a team we should be beating. We should be outdoing them. Scherzer and deGrom is better than Nola and Wheeler.
Mm-hmm.
We should be.
Okay, I've one more thing.
Yeah.
Just thought of this, wanted to add it in last minute. Your biggest worry for the Mets and your pick for team MVP after all is said and done.
Biggest worry I want to say is going to be just again with the injuries and the consistency you get from the back end of the rotation. I mean, I think we can't guarantee that Walker is going to be great. We can't guarantee Carrasco is going to be great. My worry is that we don't win games to deGrom pitches or to Scherzer pitches that we should have, and then we squander that when we definitely don't win games that Carrasco and Walker get exit in the 3rd inning, and we have to pitch Miguel Castro for 3 innings or something like that. That's my fear, that we're going to revert to this. Some of the same old shit you see from the Mets is going to be we're not going to produce runs with deGrom, or maybe we don't produce them with Scherzer now either. And to top it off, we have players getting hurt. We have Carrasco being kind of a trade bust, because that's what it would be if he has a bad year, because there's only 1 year left on his deal after that. We're not going to re-sign a guy who's 36 with a bad track record. This has to be a good year from him for this to work. So I would say that. I mean, a lot's going to ride on those 5 guys. MVP, I'm going to make a kind of a bolder prediction here. Jeff McNeil regresses to mean he's the MVP.
Okay.
Because I think he's a big straw for the drink, so to speak, because I think that guy hits 300 and it transforms the lineup and what it can do.
Well, first of all, thank you for picking a non-deGrom or Pete, because I feel like McNeil is definitely a possible, you're not being unrealistic. I feel like if he has a great year, that is huge for them.
It's huge. I'm telling you, he's the change agent for him or Lindor, but I think mostly because the two of them, if they hit better last year, I think we're a winning team, first of all. And I think we have probably 86 or 87 wins.
Yeah. My biggest worry for the Mets is I a little bit worried about the bullpen. I might want them to add an arm in the bullpen. I've seen Ottavino the last couple of years. They just added Ottavino. I'm a little bit worried because he was a little bit shaky with the Yanks and Sox. But otherwise, I'm on board with you. Like I said, I think the Mets have to be a playoff team. Like that's the minimum.
I think you have to. And I think if you get in, don't get me wrong, as a fan, I'm going to be happy if we have a competitive DS. If we get bounced in 3 games, it's like, what was all this for?
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
if we can push it to 5 against a Dodgers team or like a Braves team that's a reigning world champion, I mean, you can't really, be too upset. But you want to make the CS. And from there, I mean, you might be staring down LA or you might be staring down, St. Louis or Milwaukee. But, if you beat LA, you can beat anyone. So like that's the good news. If you beat them,
and I think like you're
downhill
thinking
from there.
yeah, I agree with your thinking that like, hey, if you get to the NLCS, that means you probably beat one of the Dodgers or the Braves, and if you do that, that is a successful season. And then from there, you're just you obviously hope that it continues, but that's already huge.
I think if you beat LA, you're the NL champion. Like preliminarily, I think if like any team beats LA in the DS, I don't think there's any serious competition beyond that. Like maybe we're the alternative team that no one wants to face because we have the ridiculous 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm.
But the Brewers are also like that, So like I think Dodgers, Brewers, and Mets might be the 3 most dangerous NL teams in the playoffs.
If the Brewers had a little bit more experience of winning in the playoffs, they'd probably be my World Series contender for the NL. I just don't like picking a team that hasn't really won any playoff series recently. But
I think I want to see Toronto in the World Series. I got to be honest.
I don't, but that's only
I know. Well, it's better than Houston. I'll tell you that.
I want to see the Yankees in the World Series. That'd be a real change of pace. So my what did I ask you? Biggest worry? My biggest worry is the rotation, pretty obviously. It's also an opportunity because if you have one of the young guys break out, even if you miss the playoffs, you found something. So it's my biggest worry, but at the same time, it's like, hey, that could lead to something good next year or the year after. Right. My team MVP that I expect, it's very difficult for me to go off the board like you did. You definitely had a better one because for me, I mean, like maybe Stanton. Maybe I'll go with Stanton because Stanton last year. I mean, really, Judge. I mean, Judge is the best player on the Yankees, but Stanton last year was stride for stride with him. Their numbers were really close. Judge usually has the edge in average, but it was closer than usual. Stanton finally started to win over Yankee fans, which is a really tough thing to do. And so I am very much rooting for him.
He won me over, honestly. I was always like, well, 2018 was great, but then it's just been a very inconsistent production. But I mean, he had 2 excellent years. I think after 2 good years, I think you're in good graces.
Yeah. He's been, and also like showing up to like really big games down the stretch, helping them get into the playoffs last year after a bad start. I think he deserves a lot of credit. That I don't know. There's some people that are just like Stanton haters. And I feel like I was that for 1 year and I'm willing to change. I was a Josh Bailey hater. Yeah. Now I'm one again, but it took a lot of time in between. But anyway, that's it.
Wrap, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see you in another year.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is we're not actually friends. We don't even see each other. We just Zoom once a year.
And we don't even like hold these accountable during the season to be like, wow, that was a horrible take. Like we don't even look at the last one. I have no idea what I said in the last one.
Well, I kind of did. And I think we talked about it a while ago, but you did a pretty good job. You were lower on the Yankees, which was correct. You had them at about where they were. I was too high on the Mets. That is the hill I always die on. Yeah. And I'm possibly dying on that hill again because I have them as like a 95 game winner.
I said we stopped. The fatal error was that we kept trying to recapture the magic with a team that was getting older, more injured, and less consistent. And now we've dropped that. We stopped fighting to do that. And we just brought in needed consistent pieces. That's the difference.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us from Mr. Belmont Bunch today. I legally changed my name to Mr. Baseball Bunch. Thank you so much for watching. We will continue to have hockey stuff because I will make playoff predictions, even though the Islanders won't be there. Dan will be pleased to hear that I've been let's just say the Rangers, not quite the first round out that I thought recently, maybe. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Going to have a lot of content, and that's it. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
On Baseball Bunch.